practice going forward. So as we all know, eCommerce Expo has been thrust into the media spotlight. In the main, I think that's for positive reasons. Its importance is obvious, and as a result of lockdown, has been the only sales channel really for many retail businesses. So one of the questions I've got is, has COVID-19 been a major catalyst for change? Or more importantly, has this change already been taking place and it has merely accelerated it? So what's been happening in retail and what are the media been talking about? Obviously, one of the things that's been within regular discussion is the fragility of the high street, which is highlighted the importance of e-commerce as a sales channel. We've seen the growth of e-commerce shopping online for food. We've also seen a lot covered on the requirement for a robust supply chain, the importance of inventory. The delivery has been brought to the fore, getting the goods to the consumer in a timely manner, the importance of that, and the importance of that as part of customer service. The importance of ethics, I think, has also been highlighted, and corporate responsibility and its role within how businesses are marketing themselves and building their brand during this very difficult time. Agility and resilience has obviously been at the top of everybody's agenda. The ability to move quickly, pivot your business quickly. We've seen many examples of that, both in the newspapers and on mainstream TV, but also a lot of businesses have been completely paralyzed for obvious reasons. A digital-first strategy. Consumers have undoubtedly embraced technology, with a lot of consumers making online purchases, largely for the first time, probably in the food sector mainly. Will we see a continuation of this? So what we're going to do this afternoon is we're going to get our esteemed panel to hopefully answer some of these questions and look at how retailers can maintain their existing customer base and generate new customer base over what is obviously going to be a very, very difficult period. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel. Firstly, we've got Andy Mulcahy. Andy is the Strategy and Insights Director from IMRG. IMRG is the UK's Association for Online Retail and the main association partner for eCommerce Expo, which many of you will know. And then we've got Michelle Whelan. Michelle is the CEO for Geometry, the global WPP-owned creative commerce agency. Janis, we've also got Janis Thomas, who leads growth and acquisition at the Wedding Shop. The Wedding Shop are the UK's largest and leading wedding list company in the UK. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce our chair for this afternoon, which is Sam Tidmarsh. Sam's the conference manager for eCommerce Expo, and many of you will already know Sam. Sam, I'm now going to pass over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Graeme. I'll invite each of our panelists to give an opening statement shortly. But first, to our audience, I'd like to invite you to respond to the poll I'm going to put in the webinar just now. So you should see that on your screens. I'll give you a few seconds and it'll be great to hear your opinion on this. You can also tweet us at our handle eCommerce Expo and use the hashtag #TechOver, which you can see on the slide in front of you. So it would be great to hear your engagement from this. So let us know what you think. Michelle, I'm now going to open the floor up to you for your opening statement to the question: are online retailers going to be able to keep their newly retained customers?
Thanks, Sam, and thanks, Graeme. Hi, everyone. It's a great provocation, especially in the last 3 months since we've seen astronomical levels of e-commerce growth. If you just look at the results of some of our categories that we're all continuously buying, the comfort categories, as I'm going to call them, some of those categories are experiencing up to 100% growth, which is something that they planned for 5 years from now. If you think of spirits, beer, confectionery, skincare, massively growing categories on e-commerce. And even in non-grocery, less traditional channels, retail channels, if you look at the growth of some of the subscription models like Milk and More, they saw 25% or 13,000 more subscriptions over the last 8 weeks, which is incredibly difficult for businesses to manage. And we've seen some of the shortfalls of that. We all know the Ocado stories. We know where deliveries haven't been able to deliver, which counterbalances, I think, some of the positive experiences that people have had with their new e-commerce experiences. I think it's important to point that out because if you look at some of the stats, Kantar have recently published that people over the age of 65, there's been a 94% increase in people shopping online. And that accounts for a 10% increase in grocery sales. So numbers that we just have never, ever experienced this level of growth in such a short period of time. And also just think of the new habits that have been formed. Some people have had really positive experiences and some people not so positive experiences. But some people will stick to it to get to the answer of this question. Some people will stay with those new habits that have been formed. But I think there will be a bit of a tension between physical retail and online retail as we go forward. And online retailers will continue to need to innovate, to pursue new experiences for some of those shoppers and really prove themselves, I think, as we come out of COVID as to why our new behaviours should stay new behaviours as we move forward.
Brilliant, thanks, Michelle. And Janis, I'll now open the floor up for your opening statement. You have a couple of minutes.
Thank you. I agree with a lot of what Michelle has said, that for me, I'm a big fan of Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and this idea that actually the vast majority of the decisions we make we're just going through life on autopilot. And then suddenly something has happened which has forced us to behave differently, that we are not able to continue with those automated routines we don't even think about. And if you have an experience that is better, whether it's a better product or better service than you'd had previously, then suddenly that's going to become your habit and your routine moving forward, because you've found a better way of doing it. Under normal circumstances, habit wins.
Janis. Andy, I'll open the floor up to your opening statement, and then I know you've prepared insights for our audience using the IMRG data, so I'll let you get straight into that from there. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sam. So to the question then, can they retain their customers? I think it's going to be a pretty difficult process, to be honest. I think that there's, I speak to a lot of people, like a very wide range of people in my job, and I think there is, dare I say, a little bit of snobbery towards online. So there's sort of high street physical retail that's the sort of pure version of it. And then online are these kind of cheats who don't have to pay for high street premises, and they put their depots in the Midlands and they don't have to pay much money on it and all that sort of thing. And I think there's a perception, therefore, that it's rather easy for them to do it, and that they're sort of cheated. I think the reality is when you've got to capture people to your website and you don't have a physical place that people have to walk past, you have to be found. And in order to be found, you have to pop up on things like Google. And in order to show up on things like Google, you have to be really good at SEO, or you have to pay Google a load of money to show up with the right ads and things like that. So I think that's the sort of thing that sort of gets misunderstood rather a lot with online. Yes, it's very easy to set up a website and do e-commerce. You can do it in a day, buy a website and set it all up and get going. You can do that. But to succeed in it is really, really, really hard. And if it is the case that this has accelerated some of the stuff that's been going on in recent years with a decline of high street and move to online, so you're going to get more companies selling online, then it just means more competition, and it just means it's going to be harder. It means you've got to pay Google probably more money, to be honest, in order to get people to do that. So I think you're going to need to work out why it is that you stand out, and why it is people are going to think that you're really great and you're worth buying from when there's just so much competition. So to get into what we've been, what I was going to show you, basically at IMRG we've been we've been tracking quite a lot of information. So as Graeme said at the start, the Trade Association for Online Retail, we capture loads and loads of information. We've got 210 plus retailers who give us their sales data every month, every week, and then we're able to track loads of stuff. We also look at a lot of performance stuff across their websites, so we know things like abandonment rates on various pages, progression rates on various pages, and we do all manner of tracking. And I'm just going to share some of this stuff with you today to give you a bit of a snapshot as to what we've seen so far. So the first thing is not working as fast as I would hope. The first thing is to show you how many have suspended their online trade. So when this first started happening, I don't know if this is working or not. I think we're on the right slide. So what? When we first started looking at this, we were looking at 300 websites every week, and we're doing that manually, incidentally. So it's quite a process for us. But the reason we're doing it manually is because we want to look at all sorts of different things. One of the things that we were looking at was whether they'd actually suspended online trade. So if you look at this, this is showing you the number of retailers along the left-hand column who have suspended their online trade, and then it's week by week when we're looking at it. So the first week, week 3 in March, which was the 20th of March, this was the week really when it all got serious and we all got sent home for being naughty. And back then there were only 2 that had suspended online trading. The official line from the government was that online retailers should continue even if they're non-essential, okay, because you don't have the same kind of challenges that you might have in a physical location to an extent. But when we got into the following week, there was 19 of the 300 that had suspended, and it really looked like online, despite the fact it could keep going, that it wouldn't really be able to, because you still have to have people in the warehouse and things like that, and they have to be in proximity to each other. I think there's quite a lot of pushback from some of those groups. The unions have sort of got quite involved in things. So it looked like things were not really going to work out. But then in the intervening weeks, as you see, April 1st week, April 2nd week, it actually came down rather a lot, the number that had suspended. So of all the ones that had stopped over time, 16 of them had suspended and then come back trading again. And the reason they've been able to do that was they put in place the kind of procedures in warehouses and things that reassured their staff, basically, and enabled them to feel safe. And it's things like having the different people not overlapping. You can't, if you've got narrow gangways, you can only have one person down there at a time. Cleaning things more regularly, and all that sort of thing. And they've basically been able to win people back over, and be assured that they can run properly. And it's stabilised now. There was only 9 the week before and 9 last week as well. So that seems to have stabilised, and we're now entering that period where they're starting to talk about being able to come back again and do other stuff. Let me show you here, though, the sort of astronomical growth that's been going on here that Michelle was just sort of touching on in that in our opening bit there. If you remember, it was sort of week 3 where it started to get pretty loud, really. And if you look before week 2, March week 2 there, you can see that the lines are sort of going along reasonably horizontal. So that is clothing, health and beauty, home and garden, electricals, just 4 of the big categories that we track. And that's showing you the growth in online sales for those categories. And as you can see, there's a massive divergence between the lines. Now it's worth looking at the y-axis there, because that is a very hard range there. So the yellow line going down, that's fashion, that's clothing, and that fell down to sort of over 40%, massive decline. So hugely lopsided demand as we moved into it. A typical range, as you can see before all this, would be somewhere in the -20 to +20 month by month. Okay, so sometimes sales are up a bit, sometimes they're down a bit, but you don't really get much fluctuation above or below that. And then moving into the period when we got locked down, clothing absolutely fell through the floor, and the other categories went up. And the reason they've gone up is because of all the common sense things that you would think. People had to buy home office equipment, and a lot of freezers got sold. Health and beauty, you might think beauty is a bit of a strange thing to be selling, but actually it's a frequency purchase and you can't go and do that in the high street. So it's just all had to move online basically. But even so, March was down for the entire month. It was 5.7% down. And that's because clothing is such a huge portion of stuff that's sold online. When that's down, it drags everything down with it. It's just such a huge portion of it. And that's come back up. It's still about -10. It has been for the last 3 weeks now. But footwear is even a bit below that. So the difficulty now is understanding where that demand is going to go. Is that split going to change? Are people going to start buy some clothing again? Are we allowed out? Where are we allowed out? Do you need to buy nice clothes and things like that? So massive divergence there, very lopsided. Does look like April, incidentally, has been a very, very strong month. So we'll get our figures on that very shortly. A natural consequence of having restricted people in the warehouse and trying to move around huge volumes of parcels, Royal Mail said that in the week following Easter Monday, every day of that week was a record-breaking peak for them in terms of the number of parcels they were moving around. When I say record-breaking, I mean bigger than Black Friday. So you can see what's going on there. It's an absolutely huge volumes of orders that are moving around now. And it is those people who've never perhaps shopped online before. It took them a few weeks, I think, to try it. But once they've got into it broadly, they think they quite like it. But as you can see here, we're looking on those 300 websites to see those that have got a message up saying that delivery is going to take a little bit longer. And right at the start, it was only a few, it was only 19, but then it jumped up quite a lot. It was 150 odd last week, and we've done the tracker again yesterday. I just haven't crunched the figures yet, but it looks like it's gone up rather a lot. So delivery basically has slowed down rather a lot, and there's a sort of reason for that. There's the challenges in the warehouse, and there's also the carriers who are trying to get the parcels out to people. They are operating with a skeleton crew really, because normally when you get to Christmas, when you get huge volumes of orders, they would employ additional temporary staff to drive the vehicles and move the parcels around. Because it was just March, April, they don't have that same volume of staff ready to go. They just hadn't planned for it. So consequently, they're having to deal with massive increase in orders, staff sickness, not having additional people to do it, and all the rest of it that goes with it, the social distancing, etc. So very difficult. And I think on the whole, you have to say that they are coping admirably with it. And the final thing, just to show you here, we were looking at some of the proposition changes that the retailers are making, and quite a lot of them have opted to extend their returns policy. And this is showing you over a 3-week period. We looked at it every week, and how much they'd extended their returns period to. So 28 days, 60 days, 90 days, etc. And the reason that they're doing this is because it's two things really. The first thing is to give a bit of extra confidence to their customers, because if you buy something and you can't really go out very much, it might be more difficult for you to return it. So they're giving you that safety net. But also there's the issue of getting loads of stuff sent back to the warehouse and having to process loads of returns, which they don't want to do at the moment. So they've sort of kicked it down the road a little bit. Now, what's quite interesting here is if you look at things like the 90-day one, if you look at the 30 to 50-day one, the blue bar, which was April week 1, there's something like 16, 17 that had extended to that. And then it goes down a little bit. And you might think that's a bit weird. Why would that happen? But the next slide, I think, explains this. So this is looking at all the categories. I know it's a terribly complicated slide, I appreciate. But each of those categories and the retailers in them, okay? So each of those bars represents the extension that they've made to their returns policy. So for example, if you look at the clothing one, which is the third one on your left, the ones that have extended it to up to 60 days, there's about 11 of them that have done that. Okay, that's what that's saying to you. Now I've put some little red marks on there just to draw your attention to a few things, because as I said, a few extended them slightly, and then that seemed to drop a bit. So what happened? And I think what's happening is that basically they're looking at each other. So you do get slightly suspicious when in the lingerie category, there's 5 retailers that have all extended their returns period policies to 90 days. I think they're basically looking at each other. So there were some of them that had extended it to maybe 30, 40 days, and then they saw their competitors were doing 90, so they go for 90 as well. Ditto in sports, you can see that there's 3 that have done 90, 3 that have done the 100 to 200. So they're just kind of looking at each other and following suit there. So quite a lot, very popular thing to do that is extend your returns policy. And with that, Sam, I'll hand over to you. I'm happy to take comments and things, type questions, and I'll deal with them in the Q&A. Thank you.
So I'm now going to move over to a Q&A with Michelle. Michelle, I guess given your knowledge of the industry, what is it that online retailers need to do differently to retain the maximum number of customers at the moment?
Yeah, it's a good question, Sam. I think one of the things that we need to acknowledge or admit to ourselves is that a lot of the increase that Andy has just taken us through in growth of certain categories has actually been somewhat forced, if you will, and not planned. It's an accident of the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And although, as Janis pointed out, new habits have been formed and some people will stick to online shopping, we've just actually completed a study across the UK as part of our Pathfinder research. And surprisingly, 70% of people of all age groups are saying they still want to go back to shopping centres, department stores, and they are craving that physical shopping experience. So I think we need to be mindful of the fact that although the online shopping experience has helped us out enormously during this time, people are actually still looking for the physical experience. So I guess one way that retailers could change to continue to have their unfair share of this audience is to provide digital experiences on their platforms. So almost replicating the real world shopping experience in a digital environment. And there's a fabulous example of that right now with Dixon Carphone. They actually are live streaming their assistants on their .com platform, enabling people to have a real conversation with a real assistant about problems or challenges or whatever it is that they're looking for, or even just help navigating the site. And I think it's an excellent example of how a retailer has suddenly taken the benefits, if you will, of a physical shopping experience and brought them to a digital platform. Sam, I think you're on mute.
Apologies. So I guess the next question would be, how do retailers use online and social channels in ways that they have not used them before?
I mean, you know, one of the intuitive reactions for an online retailer right now, especially since they've seen such a rise in customers on their platforms, is to not do anything really about it and try and just continue as they are. But recruitment is really, really important for online retailers as they move forward, and that continuous strive to make sure that there is, you know, a physical retail expression of footfall on their online platforms. And some of the brands I think that have moved really quickly to really make sure that they are recruiting new customers are the likes of Adidas, who are putting their app onto people's phones and delivering all kinds of experiences during this time. Content from celebrities doing exercises, lunchtime DJing, jam sessions, so much entertainment through the Adidas app, which is actually a commercial D2C route to those people. And I think that's what we're going to see a lot of going forward. At Geometry, we started calling these live digital experiences, where we see people connect together through an app or a platform to have an experience. And often there is commerce at the heart of that. And I think that will be a very seamless transition for a lot of retailers. You know, if you start to look at what some of the gaming platforms are doing now, I'm sure all of you at home who have kids have played a lot of Fortnite over the last couple of weeks, and they too are streaming live concerts. And those increasingly will become commerce moments for brands and retailers to get involved in. And one of the opportunities I think we all have is to start to reimagine in-home experiences and how e-commerce can play a key role in that. You know, we're hearing from the BBC that the Premier League might start in the next couple of weeks, and it'll all be behind closed doors. So people will be experiencing the Premier League at home. So what does that mean for brands? How can they tap into D2C and new e-commerce channels to be a part of those experiences at home?
It's interesting you mentioned Fortnite, because right in the center of what they call the map there, they had a huge big screen up showing a concert.
Yeah.
And instantly, thousands, millions of people tuning in to see this experience live in game. It's a channel we haven't seen before, and it's incredibly exciting. And what a great way to engage with Gen Z.
They had 26 million isolated gamers tap into the last concert that they streamed. That's 26 million new customers, for many brands. So I think we have to look at some of these platforms almost as third spaces for us to be able to look at them as commerce moments, and how we can, in a very relevant way and in an authentic way, but how do we infiltrate some of those platforms to reach new audiences?
So what does physical retail need then to be conscious of, to, I guess, compete with online retail going forward in a different way?
I think one of the key themes coming out of this, well, actually two key themes coming out of COVID are innovation. And I actually compliment a lot of the, grocery retailers. I think they are innovating really quickly through this period. Look at Sainsbury's Smart Shop. That's now pretty much extended to all of their stores. It now counts for 20% of their in-store sales, meaning you don't actually have to stand at the checkout anymore. That kind of innovation, I think we will start to see an awful lot more of. And in the research that I just touched on, for people to emerge out of COVID and to feel comfortable and safe in physical environments, hygiene is going to be one of the key factors that we have to not just acknowledge, but actually overly communicate to people. And hygiene will be everything from the environments that we're in, to the products that we touch, to the packaging that we touch. Is that packaging safe? We started coining it the no-touch touch points, because people will be somewhat nervous about touching all of these things. Mm-hmm. And even from an e-com perspective, I've heard stories of people leaving their Amazon packages outside for 48 hours because they didn't know if the brown envelope was actually safe to touch. So as much as I talked about reimagining the in-home experiences when we're watching the Premier League, I think we need to reimagine hygiene and safety, and reimagine what our products are going to look like when we get our e-com. Hopefully we'll get back to lovely fashion boxes from Net-a-Porter and Next and everyone else, but how do they need to change, and how do we make sure that we are, through our e-com, whether it's the total supply chain, the actual fulfillment and delivery of those products to them arriving in our houses, that they're hygienic and that we feel we can touch them and that they're safe to touch.
I think this is a great time to actually interject with one of our questions that we came up with, Michelle, which I guess is asking the audience, do you intend to change your e-commerce strategies from now, or do you plan to stay with what you had? Did you already have that digital transformation in place? So I'm going to put a poll in now, and it would be really appreciated to hear everyone's thoughts on it. So please do let me know what you think. It's also funny that you mentioned the subscription boxes, because I'm going to turn over to Janis now, who is the former marketing director of Birchbox and currently leading growth and acquisition at The Wedding Shop. So Janis, I guess my first question to you is, and what I believe is the question on everyone's mind, given weddings are illegal at the moment, how do you feel leading the growth at The Wedding Shop right now?
So it's interesting times that legally you cannot get married right now in the UK. What I think is very interesting for our business versus a lot of other e-commerce sectors, that there is a sense of potentially, if you've lost business now, is that ever going to come back? Whereas what's really interesting within the wedding sector is the data I've seen is around 87% of couples are postponing their wedding. They're not cancelling it, they're just moving it to a different date in the future. So for us, that's a really interesting proposition, that potentially we're just lengthening our relationship with customers and our sales cycle until they're ready to build their gift list and have their wedding and all of those things. So it's quite an interesting challenge to know that most of our demand is deferred rather than has gone away. And I think touching on something that Michelle brought up, that we've introduced virtual appointments, that we have a number of showrooms around the country where you can go and browse the products you might like to add to your wedding gift list. And now we've started offering virtual appointments so that our gift gurus can talk you through what the different ranges are, what different products you might be interested in, all of those things. And that for us is potentially a service that we will continue to offer after our showrooms are reopened, because you might not live near a showroom, and actually that might be a great experience for you that was never kind of top of our priority list to offer, but could add real benefit to our customers.
I guess as a group right now of e-commerce professionals and marketers watching in, where is it that we can add the most value right now?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really interesting time. I think particularly having worked in a lot of very dynamic e-commerce businesses, very fast-paced digital businesses, a lot of your focus has to be on paid marketing right now. How do you capitalize on opportunities? And particularly for my current situation where, that is still important, but actually a lot of people are not, until they know when they can get married again, they're not going to start, kind of saying, oh, right, I'm going to be sending out invites to my wedding and all of those things. That actually it's a huge opportunity to focus on a lot of things that are really, really important, but never reach the top of the priority pile, particularly things like organic search, that actually, if you're going to focus less on paid search, there's clear value in what is our organic ranking, and that we should be, we as marketeers we should focus on it, but it never quite reaches the top of the priority list when you could just put a paid ad at the top of the page. It's like, well, let's think smarter about it. And I think conversion optimization is also absolutely huge, that here is potentially an opportunity to make some changes to your website that might under normal circumstances be quite disruptive, that actually if your demand is lower, you can go through what would normally be quite a, if you've got to re-platform your website or something like that, normally that's a really traumatic change. And actually, if you do something like that right now, it's a really exciting opportunity. And I think to look more strategically about, what do you want to change about your business? Do you want to think about automation and AI and those things that are important, but maybe just didn't have the time? Particularly, you look at automation and thinking about different consumer behaviors and how you can optimize for them. That project takes a lot of brain power, and actually having the space to give it is exciting. And I think for me as well, thinking about the marketing team and their skill sets and, kind of what they're going to need in the future, and how, particularly, with so many of us working from home, it's easy to be very focused on the day to day, whereas actually we all still have career aspirations and things we want to do. And, let's think about what does the future look like, and not just where we are right now.
And talking about the future, I guess we're seeing a lot of movement at the moment in the e-commerce market as a whole, both B2B and B2C. Is there anything interesting that you've seen in the market since the lockdown?
Yeah, so I think for me, having worked in a lot of D2C businesses like Birchbox, a lot of particularly digital media businesses and streaming and kind of all of those things, that, I'm really interested in kind of how do you go D2C. And what has been really interesting is seeing businesses that have traditionally been B2B go D2C. So I've seen a lot in particularly people who normally supply restaurants, that you've got this supply and nothing, and where do you put it? You've seen, Crosstown Donuts partner with kind of dairy and bakers and kind of all of those things to do a food box based on those people who would normally be supplying hotels and restaurants. And for me, personally, I've been doing a lot of the B2B to D2C wine space, and particularly I had a really great experience that I was recommended a supplier that had traditionally supplied restaurants, places I like Hawksmoor. I said, "Oh, right, these guys supply Californian wine, give them a go." Ordered from them. There was a problem with the courier. So the director of the company on his Saturday drove out what must have been at least a 3-hour round trip to personally bring me my wine. And I was like, that is A, it's an amazing product, and B, just such incredible service. So I will absolutely be a long-term customer of Tiger Vines in future, that they've just done some really interesting stuff. And I think that there are a lot of things like that where you're seeing people say, how do I shift my business model? And it is interesting how D2C is this route to market that people had not traditionally seen. And I'm seeing particularly, I'm very passionate about social as a conversion medium, as something to drive your business and drive e-commerce, and seeing a lot of D2C businesses on Facebook and Instagram clearly taking off in a big way. That I'm always seeing the Cheese Geek in my feed, and I bought from them 3 times during lockdown. So they've definitely won a customer. So I think they're going back to kind of the original idea about kind of how do you grow your business and retain those new customers, that actually you potentially filled a gap that people didn't even know they had. And if you have great service, you're going to keep those people, and they're going to spread the word for you.
Yes, it's funny that you mentioned subscription again in the D2C business. I signed up to another wine box, I guess, which was kind of it was like an education D2C box called the Wine List, and they popped up in my social as well. And also I saw them in a different newsletter. So it's almost finding new channels in which to engage with customers digitally, which is particularly interesting. And I know both of us have bought from a new e-commerce supplier since lockdown, and so many people will have done. So I think it's a good time to ask the audience a question. So I'll pop another poll in. Can't ever have too many polls. So you should all see that on your screen now. Have you started buying from a new e-commerce supplier since lockdown? It'd be very interesting to hear, both as a consumer and a business, I guess. So I'm now going to open up the floor to everybody on our panel. So I'd like to welcome Andy and Michelle back. And I guess my first question would be, what is it that you're doing at the moment, or what have you seen that you find interesting about adapting to current times? How do you adapt? Anyone like to take the question first?
Sure. I mean, it's one of those really, really difficult questions, and we've got quite a bit of experience with this because of the old Brexit thing, didn't we? Where no one knew what was going on, no one knew when it was going to go on, and no one knew anything that any of it could actually mean. And I think now we seem to be in one of those situations again, having just sort of cleared that one, where we don't really know what's going to happen. So, it seems to me the most likely outcome now is we have a summer period where it's not too bad. Okay, we'll have social distancing regulations in place and all that. But I think for quite a lot of us, we might be able to go out and do stuff, maybe not to the same extent that you did. But then November, the bloody thing comes back with a vengeance. And then that's Christmas done, basically. So Black Friday and Christmas, your peak time in retail, not good. And then what happens in 2021? Do you then have a long tail to get rid of it, or are we going to have put in place sufficient processes to mean that you can really deal with this thing and isolate people that get it and whatnot, and then you don't have a bad outbreak like we've got now? Does it go on for 5 years? Does it go on for 1 year and then you're sort of done? What I mean is this a fundamental transformation, which means that we now, for the foreseeable future, are in a different place? Or is it a bit like where there's a football World Cup and, everyone gets dead excited about it, and like in the last one, England did pretty well and everyone was in pretty good mood, in England at least. But then as soon as it's done and we're out, you just sort of go back to what you were, and I think that question is very, very difficult to answer.
Maybe I'll answer it slightly differently, Sam, picking up on something that Janis said, because I think is really important, and that is, I think needs of all of us, our needs will change dramatically as we start to, experience life in a slightly different way to what we've known it. And I think that's how we adapt. We adapt around new needs and anticipating, how, as Janis explained, people might shop for a wedding dress going forward, or how people might socialize, or, how people might experience physical retail, or how people just even start to socialize with friends and family again. And I think that's how we all need to adapt to what our customers, be they B2B, be they B2C, be they the lady that's getting married, all of them will have new needs that we don't yet potentially know about. So it's about staying really close to our customers to make sure that we're listening, and that we're then developing new capability, new solutions to be able to adapt to those.
So is winning in e-commerce about winning with your customer? Is it about adapting to the customer need?
Yeah, I think I would say this as an agency that works across all retail channels. I think e-commerce channels are one group of channels within the whole retail ecosystem. And we touched on social a second ago. I think we have to look at third-party e-com, pure play e-com, D2C, social, and it's how we portray experiences across all of those channels. I think that matters. But yes, I do think specifically when we're looking at e-commerce, particularly for certain categories, when we start to look at your wine and how you might pair your wine with food, I think we do need to create these different types of new experiences for people that absolutely are relevant to them and their passions and their interests, but also, as I said, fulfill these new needs as we go forward.
And Andy, I know in your slides, it almost seems like there are some clear winners, or at least some clear verticals that are winning. What is it that you're seeing in the market at the moment? Do you see clear winners coming out of this?
Yeah, I think so. The question is what happens with demand, right? So if you just had like a normal year, then that what happens is you get different temperatures, you get different weather patterns and things like that. And then people behave differently because of the weather, right? If it's hot, they go to the beach. If it's raining, they want an umbrella. Blah, blah, blah. And you can plan for that. So you get your stock in for that. What's happened with Corona is because people got sort of locked down, there's, those soap brands and things like that, they couldn't have dreamed that they would sell so much of their stuff, and it will be in demand for a very long time. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But with freezers, people bought a lot of freezers, right? Because they were buying so much frozen food because there was all this stockpiling. But then that actually seems to have settled down rather a lot now. So I think people have sort of got freezers now, and that you don't need more freezers, so that will sort of go away. I think the clothing retailers would really, really like to know, particularly footwear ones, when is demand for our products gonna come back again? And if we are in this sort of reduced capacity for quite a long time, then if you're selling in multiple categories, so let's say footwear, home, and gifts or something like that, you might look at footwear and say, well, actually, we don't really need quite as much of that for a little while now. So you might focus on other areas, and you just got to anticipate. And this is the hard question, I think, anticipating where that demand goes, because demand doesn't normally shift to such an extent. If you remember those lines that I showed you, the massive divergence between those lines, you don't normally get that. So is that going to settle down back into a reliable pattern again? Or, is this a longer term low demand for footwear, low demand for going out clothes, or not?
We've had a question from Herman Ramida in the Q&A, who wants to ask about Amazon. So they say Amazon's had huge growth last month, and we're seeing brands putting their products there more and more. Do you think they'll continue growing, or will they face problems in the near future? And of course, this question from Kerman touches on whether we're going to continue seeing this rise in DTC as well, or whether we're going to see a proliferation of all channels. What do you think, Janis?
I think Amazon's a really interesting one that they've talked about how actually they've had to deprioritize the delivery of certain categories and kind of all of those things. You've seen a lot of discussion in the media about how are they treating their workers and things like that increasingly consumers are making moral decisions as well, that you see, the backlash against some of the brands that initially said they weren't going to furlough workers and those kind of things that I think, Amazon are so huge that I can't see any kind of change to their business in the kind of immediate term. But I think there is a question kind of long term, particularly if you do end up with Amazon is your habit, and you've ended up because you couldn't get the thing that you would normally buy from them, you went somewhere else. Then do you maintain that relationship with your new supplier rather than using Amazon potentially? And I think particularly within grocery retail, it's really interesting to see that, that Amazon's services clearly had a huge rise in demand, as all of them have. But what seems to be most interesting is Tesco saying that, they've managed to add 2 Ocado-sized businesses worth of online delivery is absolutely immense. So I think what's interesting in this current environment is how quickly can you adapt to the sort of changing circumstances that Andy was describing?
We do all keep touching on the large grocery retailers, and of course, one of our other questions in the Q&A from Chris Masters, he's put in, how do small businesses compete with the likes of Sainsbury's? Compete on what grounds is a good question, but I'll put that directly to Michelle. What do you think? How do small businesses compete with the like of Sainsbury's?
I'll just connect that to the previous question as well about D2C. I think we're going to see a huge growth in D2C as a lot of the smaller, let's call them convenience stores, and smaller cafes and takeaway restaurants all try and find a way of shoring up their businesses. All of these businesses who may not have had an online presence, I think will start to use digital shop fronts in order to be able to put their menus, if you will, or their full store ingredients online. And we're starting to see elements of that emerge now, where small convenience stores are giving themselves a digital shop front, but backed by, let's say, AB InBev with their whole menu of drinks that are available to them. So actually it starts to completely change their business models. And I think, being more agile, being faster, offering great service, as Janis already described, I think those are ways that smaller businesses can compete against the bigger supermarkets.
Great, thank you. And Janis, we have a question which has come in from Miles Millward. He asks, what do you mean by introducing automation?
So particularly, I'm thinking, I'm a marketeer. I'm thinking about marketing automation, and I think particularly that you do have different customers with different needs and different behaviours. And generally, as we move away from a kind of one-size-fits-all approach, particularly, as Michelle talked about, being really responsive to customers' needs and understanding them, then that's increasingly about treating them as individuals rather than a homogenous group. So I think automation right now, because of the work involved, it's a great opportunity to do that serious thinking and get those kind of projects up and running.
Great, thanks. I'm going to take this opportunity to put another poll out there, and it'll be our final poll. Don't worry, everyone. This is the last one. But I'd like to return to that original question, which is, are online retailers going to be able to keep their newly retained customers? All of the answers are anonymised, so please do give your honest feedback and let me know by this poll if your opinion has changed over the course of this webinar. So I've put that in now, and let me know what you think. So I guess returning to that original question, Janis, what would be your key takeaway? Who are the winners in e-commerce, and how do you adapt?
I think going back to Michelle's point about understanding your customer and responding to them, I think they are going to be the brands that win, is understanding what your customers need and meeting those needs, being responsive and providing great service is what's going to win.
Michelle, who are the winners in e-commerce, and how do you adapt?
So I think the winners in e-commerce are those who see e-commerce as one set of retail channels and actually try and create a seamless experience across all retail channels. Because as I said at the outset, I think e-commerce plays a role, plays a part in selling, but it's not the only part. And we need to look at new platforms and new physical experiences to reimagine the total retail experience as we go forward.
And I'll pose the same question to you, Andy. Who are the winners in e-commerce, and how do you adapt?
So I'm gonna throw in the environment, actually. It's something that we haven't really discussed today. But before all this, the crisis was the environment, and then this has been a little bit of a holiday, I suppose, from that. But retail wasn't in a good place before we got into this. So we're tracking sales from sort of 200 retailers, a lot of big companies in there. And the online sales growth, which is where you assume all the kind of growth is, it has been slowing down. In the first couple of months of this year, it was flat, like 0% growth basically for the first 2 months, and then we got into the madness of all this, and then it's kind of jumped up and down like crazy. But it wasn't in a happy place before, and it's very difficult to pinpoint exactly what was the problem there. And I can't help but think that the headline news of environmental sustainability, whatever you want to call it, is kind of getting to people. I think that message was getting through to people a bit, and it's not easy to just adapt your behaviour immediately. But I think in the longer term, over a few years rather than a few months, I think people will take up new habits. And what's going to happen from this? I think that there's a lot of sort of retail brands that are going to come out of this with a lot less money than they had, and they've been so sort of resistant to change that kind of was banging on the door sort of thing. It needs to happen. I know it's hard to change, but they haven't really done it, and I wonder if they're going to be able to get back on their feet and really win after this, or whether you're going to get a new kind of wave of company come through who absolutely are built around that sort of environmental idea. It's sustainability from the ground up kind of thing, and people I think will respond very well to that. If you've got the two options of it's sustainable to buy from this one or it's not from this one, and the cost is negligible, it's not really a choice. So I think that the ones that come out of this and do really well will be the ones that nail that. And I think investors as well. I think investors will plough money into those kind of companies. So I just think it's all tilting that way, really.
It's just keep thinking about the future, and it's 100% something we should touch upon, perhaps in a future webinar as well. And also perhaps as part of our kind of new newsletter series. And I just wanted to pop in this into the webinar right now. So this is an opportunity to sign up for our newsletter, which we're now putting out as our part of our digital offering for eCommerce Expo. So I'd love for you all to sign up and hear from experts like Janis, Michelle and Andy as part of our kind of newsletter offering. I'd love if you could sign up, so please do. And I'll call things off there, and I want to say a huge thank you to Andy, Michelle and Janis for taking part and offering your thoughts and advice on the topic, so thank you. And thank you to everyone who joined our first ever webinar. There will be more, but for now, sign up to our newsletter and we'll let you know when it will come. Thanks so much, and thanks again to Janis, Michelle and Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye everyone.